He called me into his office with that same casual arrogance he always wore like a tailored suit. There was no warning, no discussion, no feedback sessions, no second chances. Just a statement. We are letting you go. We are moving in a different direction. I nodded once, calm, collected, and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because, frankly, I already knew this was coming. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that the direction he was so eager to move in had been built on my quiet decisions for the past 6 years. From the very foundation of the company to the financial backing that kept it afloat, I had shaped it all. Not with public speeches or my name on the door, but from behind the scenes. I was the silent co-founder, and in 48 hours, that silence would end, loudly. My name is Elliot, and this is the story of how I was fired from my own company, and how I took it back without saying a word. It all started with an idea. Not a flashy pitch deck sort of idea, but one that was born out of frustration. At the time, I had been working at a mid-sized consulting firm, burnt out by endless meetings and watching brilliant concepts die in committee rooms. I had met someone at a networking event, someone with the operational background I lacked. She had the precision and structure. I had the product vision and the risk tolerance. Together, we put together a business plan. She would be the public face. I would stay in the shadows. There were good reasons for that. I had other ventures, I wanted flexibility, and more importantly, I had no desire to be the center of attention. I invested the first round of capital, negotiated the seed funding, and handled the equity structure. We set up the company with me as a silent partner, holding 47% ownership through a quiet trust in a small firm out of Delaware. Clean, legal, invisible. It worked for years. We built something strong, lean, resilient, profitable. We hired smart people, scaled slowly. We did not chase funding rounds or headlines. We focused on margin, repeat clients, and long-term contracts. By the end of year 4, we had 32 employees and a waiting list of partners who wanted in. And then she left. Not abruptly, not with drama, but life pulled her in another direction. She got married, moved to another state, and wanted out of day-to-day operations. We brought in someone else. He had pedigree, former executive at a larger firm, ran divisions, gave confident presentations, dressed like a magazine ad. On paper, he made sense. In person, something always felt off. At first, I stayed optimistic. I had seen worse personalities, and I did not care for style. I cared about substance. He said all the right things at the beginning, talked about preserving our DNA and scaling thoughtfully. But within 6 months, he started making changes, real changes, big ones. Processes were restructured. Product timelines were accelerated. People were replaced. Most concerning to me, he started interfering with our client relationships, shifting messaging without understanding the nuance. When one of our original engineers quietly resigned and I asked him why, he just said, "It is not the same place anymore." By that point, I had already started attending the board meetings again. Not as a voting member. Remember, I was silent. But I sat in, reviewed the documents, and occasionally asked questions through legal channels. I did not want to overstep. I still believed that maybe, just maybe, he would settle down, that he just needed time to find rhythm. But then he started burning bridges. He alienated 2 of our top clients within a single quarter, took a pitch meeting I'd nurtured for 2 years, and tried to upsell them on a bloated package without discussing it with the technical team. The client walked away. We lost them. And still, he spun it like a growth decision. They were not aligned with our new direction, he told the team in a meeting. I sat in the back of the Zoom call, silent, my camera off, just watching. He had no idea I was there. That was the first time I realized I might need to act. The moment that sealed it came 3 weeks later. We had an internal team that handled infrastructure. Brilliant, meticulous people. One of them flagged a major issue with how he was pushing deployment schedules. It would compromise security. They were clear. It was not an opinion, it was a fact. He overrode them. Not only that, but he called them resistant to change and removed one of them from a key project. I do not know if he did it for control or ego or both, but I knew then this was not a leader trying to evolve the company. This was someone who wanted a new empire, built on the ashes of what we had spent 6 years creating. So I asked for a private meeting. I kept it simple. I said I was concerned about the pace of change. I asked if he had thought about long-term financial risk. I reminded him, gently, that we had never been a churn-and-burn business. He smiled, and he said, "I think you have gotten too comfortable here." 2 weeks later, I was fired. He said it was a cost-cutting measure, that my role had become redundant, that we were refocusing the business. I listened to his speech in full, all 10 minutes of it, while he delivered it like he had practiced it in front of a mirror. I thanked him for the opportunity, shook his hand, and walked out without saying anything more. But I already knew what was coming next. What he did not realize was how tightly the company's funding was tied to a quiet clause in the investor agreement. My capital, and the capital of the partners I had brought in, accounted for 62% of operational funding. The funds had been structured through staggered quarterly releases, subject to certain review thresholds. He had violated 2 of them. The agreement had built-in protections. If leadership made decisions that were inconsistent with the founding principles of the company, or materially damaged long-term client relationships, the funds could be frozen pending review. And that review had just concluded. The documents were signed. The legal notice went out at midnight. At 8:13 a.m. the next morning, he sent a company-wide message. There was a temporary pause on all payments to vendors. By 11 a.m., one of our suppliers emailed back, "We are suspending services until payment is received." By 3 p.m., our staff group chat was on fire, and I had said nothing, not a word. The team did not know the full picture. The public did not know either. Only the board had been informed, quietly, in closed session without press releases. I had asked for discretion, not revenge. I was not interested in headlines. I was interested in accountability. And that moment, watching everything fall apart, not because I wanted it to, but because someone thought I was disposable, was both heartbreaking and oddly satisfying. He had fired me, not knowing I was the one who had kept the lights on all along. And now, he was about to learn what happens when you cut off the hand that feeds you. The thing about silence is, it unnerves people more than noise ever could. By the second day after the funding freeze, the emails started flooding in. Some were cautious, others confused, a few were furious. I watched the chaos unfold from my office. Not the company office. I had long since shifted to working out of a small studio space I kept downtown. No branding on the door, no nameplate, just quiet, functional workspace, coffee that I actually liked, and a view of the river I had grown to depend on. By midweek, 3 department heads had reached out to me personally. These were not idle messages. They were not looking for gossip or explanations. They were looking for direction. They were looking for me. I had kept my distance for so long, too long probably, but I never disappeared completely. I checked in with them when I could, offered advice, helped them think through difficult launches. They remembered that. And in the absence of leadership, they reached out. I still said nothing about what happened. All I told them was, stay steady, do your jobs, let the board handle it. Meanwhile, the board was handling it. And not well, at least not from his perspective. When the funding freeze was triggered, it automatically notified the Financial Oversight Committee. That committee had only met 3 times in 6 years. Now, they were having emergency calls twice a day. The chair of that committee, a man who once told me I asked too many questions, now suddenly found himself asking even more, only with a lot more pressure. I sat in on the calls. I never raised my voice, never had to. I let the numbers speak for me. The company's runway had shrunk from 14 months to 4. Cash reserves were misallocated. A planned product launch had failed internal testing and was still pushed to market. 3 clients had walked. Internal turnover hit a 12-month high, but the final blow, the one that mattered, was buried in a quarterly update no one had read closely before. It showed a performance drop in client retention metrics by 23% over the last 2 quarters. That alone would have triggered a review. The fact that it coincided with my departure, that raised alarms. That was the first time the chair asked me to speak privately. He wanted to know what I thought, what I really thought. So I told him everything, not in anger, not in spite, just facts. I walked him through the decisions, the restructuring, the personnel choices, the ignored warnings. I explained the clauses in the agreement, the thresholds that were crossed. I showed the data. He asked me if I was seeking reinstatement. I said no. I did not want my old job back. I did not want any job back. I wanted the company to be what it was meant to be, and right now, it was not. That conversation shifted things, not publicly, not immediately. But quietly, the board started pulling documents. By the end of the week, they had put him on temporary leave pending investigation. They framed it gently. Time to focus on realigning priorities. But we all knew what it meant. I did not gloat. I did not even reply to the internal message when it went out. But I did make one move. I called a meeting, not with the board, not with investors, with the staff. I asked for it to be off record, no cameras, no minutes, no agendas. Just me and the people who had helped build this thing from the ground up. We met in the same warehouse-turned-conference room where we had held our very first planning session 6 years ago. Back then, there were 8 of us. This time, almost 30 came. Some of them looked stunned to see me. A few looked relieved. One woman, our longest-standing account manager, just nodded once when she saw me, like she had been waiting. I stood at the front of the room, hands in my pockets, and said, "I know the last few weeks have been confusing. I want to tell you the truth." And then I did. I told them about my role, my ownership, my silence, why I stepped back, why I had let others take the stage. I told them I had believed that staying out of the way was the right thing to do, for scale, for optics, for momentum. But I had been wrong, because sometimes silence is not humility. Sometimes it is avoidance, and what happened was my responsibility too. I said I did not come back to take over. I came back to clean up what I helped build. I thought there would be skepticism, pushback, maybe even anger. There was not. One of the engineers leaned forward and said, "So, are you steering the ship again?" I said, "Not unless you want me to." They did. The next few weeks were not dramatic. They were deliberate. We held review meetings, one department at a time, quietly replaced some of the bloated processes, froze bad vendor contracts, reopened dialogue with former clients. We brought back the infrastructure specialist he had let go, the one who had warned him. When she came in, she did not say a word at first. She just looked at me and smiled. "I figured you were still somewhere in the building," she said. I told her the building had forgotten who actually paid the bills. The board moved quickly after that. They issued a statement. The former CEO resigned. A press release was drafted, standard language. Exciting new phase of leadership. The kind of phrases that are designed to say everything and nothing at once. But word got out anyway. Staff talked. Former clients talked. Vendors talked. And the one thing they all said was, I knew something was off. Glad to see it is being corrected. I declined all interview requests. I deleted 5 drafts of a LinkedIn post. I did not want applause. I wanted peace. We restored the funding lines, restarted the paused contracts, paid every vendor in full, with interest. One of them wrote back, "We will never question your company's integrity again." I printed it out and taped it to the side of my desk, because that was all I had ever really wanted, that the integrity stayed intact. A month after I returned, I stepped back again, but this time not into silence. I hired someone new, not flashy, not loud. He had been running operations at a nonprofit before. Understated guy, but razor sharp. I brought him in, explained the situation, and told him what I needed. Someone who understood the people side of building. He got it immediately. He met every team member one-on-one, asked questions, actually listened. When he spoke, it was concise, clear, not a performance, just leadership. I stayed on the board. I still sit in on strategy sessions. But I do not manage anymore. I do not need to, because the company now remembers where it came from and who made it possible. In the months that followed, I got a call from someone I had not spoken to in years. The co-founder, the one who had left early on. She had seen the headlines, not from the press, but from the people. She said, "You finally stopped being quiet." I laughed. I guess I had to. She asked me if I ever regretted staying behind the scenes for so long. I paused, thought about the sleepless nights, the internal emails, the collapse, the rebuilding. "No," I said, "but I learned not to disappear completely." Silence has its place, but sometimes the most powerful move is knowing exactly when to speak. And when I did not need to shout. I just had to pull the plug. The company did not fall apart, it did not implode or make headlines for all the wrong reasons. It did what most real companies do when hit with a course correction. It shook, it bent, but it did not break. It stabilized. By the end of the 3rd quarter, numbers were moving in the right direction again. Client retention recovered. The internal churn slowed. The product roadmap was simplified, made more realistic. We stopped trying to be flashy and started focusing again on what we did best, solving actual problems for people who needed real solutions. It was not exciting, but it was sustainable. And in business, that is what matters more than press or plaques or staged leadership retreats. We had built something that could endure, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I still remember the morning I walked out of the building without checking my phone. That may not sound like much, but for me, it was everything. No nervous habit, no silent scan for crises. I just left. Got coffee, sat in a park, listened to the wind move through bare branches and thought, maybe this chapter is actually over. I am not a sentimental man, not in the way people mean it, but I do pay attention to the small signs, the details most people miss. And that day, I noticed something small that told me things were truly different. One of our youngest hires, barely a year out of school, was leading a client onboarding call in the atrium. Her voice was steady, clear. She had written the deck herself. I had seen an earlier version. It was better than what I used to draft in my first few years. She saw me walking past and gave a small nod. Not like she was trying to impress me, not like she needed approval. It was a nod between two people who understood what they were building, and respected each other's place in it. That is when I knew it was no longer mine to hold. The company had grown up. We had grown up, and I had done what I came back to do. I did not disappear, though, not again. I stayed accessible, once a week, office hours, open to anyone. Not just managers, anyone. The door stayed open, the lights stayed on, and if someone wanted to sit across from me with a sketch of an idea, I was there. But they knew I would not do it for them. That was the shift. I had built, then protected, but now I was teaching. Quietly, without fanfare. That became enough. I started carving out space for other things. Reading again, traveling. Speaking at small local founder roundtables. Not the big expos or convention circuits, that was never my thing. I preferred the unpolished rooms. The ones with 20 folding chairs and a whiteboard that barely worked. That is where the next good ideas live, in those awkward, imperfect beginnings. One evening, I was speaking at a community startup night. A kid, barely 20, asked me, "How do you know when to walk away from something you helped build?" Everyone in the room turned to listen, like it was some sacred question, like there was a single right answer. I told him this. When you are the only one holding the weight, it is too early. But when others can carry it without you, even when you are not looking, that is when you can walk, and when you do, it should feel like trust, not escape. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. A year passed. The board voted to expand. Not for ego, not for headlines, but because we had the foundation to do it now, on our terms. We opened a second satellite office in a city we had turned down years ago. Not a flashy rollout. No celebrity endorsements, just a quiet ribbon cutting, a few handshakes, and a team ready to serve. I did not even attend the opening. Instead, I watched the live feed for 5 minutes from home, then turned it off and went back to cooking dinner. That was the most satisfying moment of all. Knowing I was not needed anymore, but still trusted, still respected. The old CEO? Last I heard, he started consulting. Still giving talks, still using buzzwords. But the story had cooled. The press had moved on. The industry had moved on. And so had I. I no longer checked the analytics dashboard each morning. No longer reacted to every whisper of bad news. The tension I once carried in my shoulders, the one that followed me through meetings and late-night calls, was gone. One afternoon, I was sitting in a quiet cafe just reading, when I overheard 2 young analysts at the next table talking about our company. They were analyzing our quarterly pivot, speculating how we managed to recover so quickly after a leadership shakeup. One of them said, "Whoever pulled the strings behind that must really know what they are doing." I smiled, said nothing, and went back to my book. That was enough for me. I still get asked sometimes why I did not fight back sooner, why I let someone like him push me out of my own company, why I stayed silent. Here is what I say now. Because timing matters more than pride. Because influence is not always visible. Because real power is not in shouting the loudest. It is in knowing when to pull the funding and let gravity do the rest. In the end, I was not trying to prove anything. I just wanted to protect the thing I had helped build. And once I did, I let go. I did not need applause. I did not need revenge. I did not need to stand on a stage. I just needed the company to survive. And it did.